Hi, and welcome to another podcast with Hanaz Writers Limited. My name's Charlotte, and I'm a Year 2 teacher who's had experience working in a nursery for children aged 0 to 4 years old. If you haven't heard any of these podcasts before, then check out Hanaz Writers' YouTube and Spotify channels and have a listen there. In today's podcast, I'm going to be talking about social media and looking at how it's changing the English language. I'll also touch on how this can help a writer with their work nowadays, especially when they're writing their stories. In the past, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok didn't exist, partly because the internet wasn't a thing. That also didn't exist, and computers weren't as sleek and smooth as they were today. They were these huge, clunky machines that had to stay on a table. And they were really only used for writing documents and letters and storing information, making databases. And it wasn't really accessible to lots of people, only those few who could afford it. Mobile phones were also huge brick-like machines, which you could use to call someone and talk to them. Texting hadn't even been invented when the phone was first created, when the mobile phones were created anyway. The only way that you could be sociable with others was to go out of your house and talk to people. You made friends in school, at work, or you talked to your neighbors, and there was friendly neighborhood barbecues or housewarmings or even street parties. Yes, street parties were a huge thing in the past. But currently, as the internet has gotten better and better over the years and computers and mobile phones have grown with it, everyone is now able to access lots of different things at any time of the day. We've got applications, we've got websites, and they're constantly streaming videos and content into our phones and computers, and we can access them. Now just think about how you're listening to this podcast. You're probably maybe sitting on the bus or a train or a plane or in your car, and you put this podcast on to listen to it in the background. In the past, radio stations were played in the background. So you had to record songs onto a cassette tape, and then you played the songs from your cassette tape into your tape players. Or as technology improved, it became CD, and then, you had vinyl records, and then you had cassette tapes, and then you had CDs. And now everyone's going back to vinyl. So it's kind of a little loop round. And nowadays, the big thing for everyone is the use of the TikTok app. And it shows you short video clips of someone doing amazing things or just everyday mundane things. And they're doing it in a funny way, or they're doing it in an interesting way, or they're just showing you how to make and do things, which is pretty cool. So things that might seem impossible or crazy at one point, shown by a person who does it, must be true. So it could be like someone jumping off a cliff of a mountain and snowboarding down the cliff off to the end. That's pretty cool. Along with the video, there might be like catchphrase or slang words which is used. Of course, slang isn't something new. It's always there, and it's always changing over time because slang words work. So the way that slang words work is that each new generation will own words. They will take the words, whether it's an existing word or one that they create, and then they'll use that word and change the meaning of it. For example, the word cool. It's a real word that means to let something cool down. Something that's hot, let it get colder gradually over time. So you've got hot food, let your food cool down, it's too hot. At one point, this word was taken over by the younger generation in the 80s and 90s, and they began to change the meaning of the word. They used the word cool to mean a person or a thing that has the same kind of behavior or the attitude as the word cool actually meant. For example, Sam is so cool. So they use the word cool to personify something or to describe a person or a thing. Or, wow, that is so cool. Or, oh, wow, your shoes are cool. So it just means that the person, Sam, or the thing that you're talking about, or the pair of shoes is something that someone admires. It's a cool thing. It's a calm, unique personality. It's pretty chill. It's a pretty cool thing. And it's something that might be fashionable, makes someone look good, or someone is a really cool person. So they're a really chill person. They're someone that you can hang out with. They're someone you want to get to know. They're someone you think of as popular. So then the word cool changes meaning with this slang, especially with the generation that used it. So then they would use it all the time. Like, oh, wow, that's cool. Or, oh, look at those cool shoes. Look at that cool car. And once enough people use that word and its new meaning, people have been using it enough times, then it becomes part of the language. And slang words are usually created by and used by teenagers and kids of that age. Each new generation of teenagers, say after every 10 to 20 years, will try to create new slang words for themselves. And it's probably just a way to identify themselves as being separate from their parents, when you're a 10-year-old to 20-year-old, in that time, you see your parents as way old. They're 30, 40, they're not with the times, they're not with it. They're using their slang language, which is now you see it as old and tired and just what is. And then you use the story where the parents try to use the new cool slang terms, and then you're like, no, just don't even bother, mum. Like, no, please don't. It's embarrassing. But with social media, the use of new slang words just spreads so quickly. So I just wanted to highlight that in this podcast. At the moment, in using TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and short videos that pop up, lots of new slang has popped up with it. Videos clearly show examples of the slang word. They show the person or the attitude of the word that's being used. Take a moment to just think about what video have I just watched recently and it's used a slang term, maybe a person who's called a Karen. Hey, shout out to the Karens. A slay queen. Oh, yeah. An influencer. Lots of kids are like, I'm going to be an influencer when I grow up. Oh, God. And then glow ups, busse, food, and so on and so on. There's quite a lot of new terminology, quite a lot of new language being used all the time. So then, taking it back a step, what does this mean for writers and their stories? Not just people making content and videos, but people who are writing their stories and novels and books. Writers need to be aware of these types of words, and they need to keep up with it and how they're being used. So, say a writer wants to write a story for teenagers, they need to include the relevant language. They need to include terms and these kind of words. Characters are the same age as the current teenagers. They're going to be up to 12 to 14 to 15, up to 18. And they need to use these new slang terms to keep current. The kids reading them at the moment will be like, oh yeah, look, this character's also using the same language that I'm speaking at the moment. And it makes them a bit more integrated and a bit more part of the world, part of that book. They become part of that story. They get excited about it. They're interested in it, and they want to read more books about it. So if the writer uses these new slang terms or tries to create a new term in their book, they need to be aware of the pros and the cons of doing so. So pros, doing this, it helps their books to have the right words, the right terminology, the right slang. It's being used by the generation that they're writing for and the generation that wants to read the book. And then they become really popular, and then they sell more and more books, and it becomes a massive thing. Cons, maybe they're not aware of the new slang terms and the new ideas that's relevant to teenagers today, which is fair enough because it's changing so rapidly at the moment, like new words, new terms, everything. And then their books might not have the right terminology, or their books might seem outdated unless they're writing a period kind of story set in the past. So it's meant to be written in the past, and it's meant to have words from the past, which is fine. But then it might mean that the books are not popular, they might not sell, and wouldn't do so well. So readers like to read books that are relevant for themselves. Most of the time, they want to read about characters that are having a similar life to them or have similar experiences, or maybe a crazy, wonderful experience that they want to experience themselves. And it's just something so they can relate their own experiences with it. So someone reading the book will be able to say, oh, this character is very similar to me, my friend, and a little group of friends and what we do. And then it's just using, if they use their language, especially when they're writing groups of people talking or they have people talking to each other, you got to have the right language, you got to have the right slang words. Then the reader becomes a bit more invested in reading the book. They want to find out what happens to the characters and how they deal with their situations. Then they might recommend their book to their friends. And yeah, because they just genuinely like the book and they liked reading it. And in turn, then the book becomes popular. I think when I was growing up in 1997, the very first Harry Potter book was published, and it was a completely new book about a boy who finds out that he's a wizard and he can do magic. And then he goes on this magical journey to find out more about his mysterious past. And the book just became so popular. It was so popular that it was able to use its own terminology and words. And everyone who read the book, who read Harry Potter, began to use the word in their everyday language. So we had terms like muggles, which was used to describe people who didn't have magic. So then we would say, oh, you're such a muggle. You're such a normal person. People also started using Latin words, and especially the spells that were in the book. People probably didn't realize that they were using Latin words, but, the odd word here like accio, and then they pretend to bring something towards themselves, or apparate, and then the things would happen, and expelliarmus, and they just randomly say it, or they say it as part of the skit or something. But, they have these words and just throw them and just try to use it in their language in everyday words, which is quite funny. Liked the characters. There was lots of different characters in the book. So Harry Potter had so many characters. The three main characters was Harry, Ron, Hermione. Then you had the spin-off character, they had Giant Hagrid, you had Dumbledore, you had Mrs. McGonagall, you had Ron's brothers and his crazy family. You had Sirius Snape and so many characters in such a big book, and each character was different and they each became a meaning in themselves eventually. So if you were book smart, you were a Hermione. If you were a bit lazy, you were a Ron. And if you were the quiet kid that no one really understood, then you were a Harry. So J.K. Rowling's books really spread like wildfire, and soon as using the books and the words as well to some degree. And then in the internet age, it worked really well during this time, because then lots of TikToks were created of children creating magic spells and things disappearing and appearing. So overall, social media seems to have a lot of influence in changing the English language. Lots of different types of contents give rise to different types of words and changes to words and their meanings. It's quite a powerful thing when you think about it. So just take, for example, Karen, the name of a person. And it's suddenly been turned into another type of meaning due to a person called Karen having a bit of a moment, and that moment was caught on camera. And people then took that moment and they basically highlighted it and saying people who act and behave this way will now and forever always be called a Karen. And then you see more and more of this kind of behavior, and you see more videos of this kind of person. And then eventually everyone knows a Karen of sorts. Well, the writers can work on their stories as well to include the right slang. But if they don't get their book and work published in the same time frame, then the words that they use become meaningless, and they eventually lose all meaning to their readers. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. Let me know what you think. Get onto social media. What do you think about how social media is changing the English language? And how is this affecting people who want to be writers and their work? If you've enjoyed this podcast, then you can like and subscribe to Hanaz Writers YouTube and Spotify channels. I will be making some more podcasts in the future. You can also follow Hanaz Writers on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. They are at hanaz.writers. Thank you for listening, and until next time, bye!